For 8 years, I paid my family's rent, groceries, and medical bills. My brother never contributed a dollar. When I asked him to help, Dad said, "That's not his responsibility." I stopped all payments that night. 2 weeks later, Mom showed up at my door crying. "My name's Oliver. I'm 34, and if you told me a year ago that I'd be sitting here telling strangers on the internet about the night I dismantled my entire family's financial safety net with one phone call and a glass of whiskey, I would have laughed in your face. But here we are, and honestly, the story is so absurd that if I don't get it out somewhere, I might actually lose my mind. So grab a snack, settle in, and try not to judge me too hard until you've heard the whole thing. Or judge me. I'm past caring at this point. Let me back up. I grew up in a small town outside of Knoxville, Tennessee. My parents, Walt and Jolene, had me when they were barely 20, and my little brother Sutton came along 4 years later. Dad worked at a paper mill for most of my childhood, and Mom did part-time bookkeeping for a couple of local businesses. We weren't poor, but we weren't exactly rolling in it either. The kind of family where you got one pair of new shoes at the start of school, and you'd better make them last until spring. Now here's the thing about my family that you need to understand before any of this makes sense. Sutton was the baby, the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. And look, I get it to some degree. Sutton was born with this natural charm that I just didn't have. He was the kid who could talk his way out of a detention, who teachers described as spirited instead of difficult, who girls liked and guys wanted to be friends with. Meanwhile, I was the quiet, responsible one, the one who got decent grades, kept his head down, and never caused problems. You know what you get for being the easy kid? You get ignored. Not in a dramatic, lock you in the closet way. Just in the way where nobody worries about you because you're fine. Oliver's fine. Oliver doesn't need anything. Oliver can handle it. I started working at 16. Bagged groceries, mowed lawns, eventually got a job at a mechanic shop where I discovered I was actually pretty good with my hands. By the time I graduated high school, I had a plan. I was going to get my degree in mechanical engineering, and I was going to build a life that looked nothing like the paycheck-to-paycheck existence I'd grown up in. And I did it. I put myself through college with scholarships, part-time work, and a stubbornness that bordered on clinical. I graduated at 22, got hired at a manufacturing firm in Nashville, and within 5 years I was making really solid money. Not private jet money, but comfortable. Really comfortable. Sutton, on the other hand, took a different route. He went to college for about 3 semesters before dropping out to pursue music. Then it was photography, then personal training, then some vague online business that I never fully understood, and I'm pretty sure involved selling overpriced supplements to people on Instagram. The man had a new passion every 18 months and a track record of quitting things right around the time they required actual sustained effort. Here's where my role in all this started. I was 26 when Mom called me crying because Dad had gotten laid off from the mill. The whole plant was shutting down. They had about 2 months of savings and a mortgage payment that wasn't going to make itself. I didn't even hesitate. I started sending money home that month. $1,500 every single month, like clockwork. At the time, it felt like the right thing to do. It was the right thing to do. These were my parents. They raised me, kept a roof over my head. And yeah, maybe they weren't perfect, but who is? The $1,500 covered their mortgage and most of the utilities. Then Dad's truck broke down, and I covered the repair. Then Mom needed dental work that insurance wouldn't touch, and I covered that too. Then there were groceries during a rough stretch, and a new water heater when there's cracked in the middle of January, and property taxes, and Dad's blood pressure medication, and 100 other things that just kept piling up like some kind of financial avalanche that never stopped rolling. By the time I was 28, I wasn't just helping my parents anymore. I was essentially supporting them. And here's the part that still makes my jaw clench when I think about it. Sutton was living at home. Rent-free, bill-free, responsibility-free. He was 24 years old, sleeping in his childhood bedroom, eating food that I was paying for, using electricity that I was keeping on, and his biggest concern on any given Tuesday was whether his protein shake had enough ice in it. I brought it up once early on, called Mom and said, "Hey, Sutton's living there. Shouldn't he be contributing something?" And Mom hit me with the classic, "Oh honey, he's still figuring things out. You know how he is. He's not in the same position you're in." And I let it go, because I was Oliver, and Oliver lets things go. Oliver handles it. Oliver's fine. The thing is, I actually was fine for a while. I was making enough money that the monthly payments to my parents were manageable. Tight, but manageable. I started dating a woman named Cordelia around that time, an absolute firecracker of a human being who worked as a physical therapist and had the kind of no-nonsense attitude that I desperately needed in my life. She was the first person who ever looked at my family's situation and said, "Oliver, this isn't normal." And I remember getting genuinely defensive about it, because when you've been doing something for years, it starts to feel like gravity. It's just the way things are. You don't question gravity. But Cordelia planted a seed. She didn't push. She just quietly observed, and every now and then she'd say something like, "Did Sutton get a job yet?" Or, "Has your dad looked into disability assistance?" She wasn't being mean. She was being sane. And slowly, like a frog in a pot of water that's gradually warming up, I started to realize just how hot things had gotten. By year 6, the monthly amount had crept up to close to $2,500. My parents' house needed a new roof. Dad's health was getting worse, and he needed more medications. Mom's part-time bookkeeping clients had mostly dried up, and Sutton, bless his heart, had started a landscaping business that he ran for exactly one summer before deciding it was too physically demanding. The man was a personal trainer for 6 months, but mowing lawns was too physically demanding. I want you to sit with that for a second. I was 32 now, engaged to Cordelia, trying to save for a house of our own. And every month I was watching a chunk of money that could have been going toward our future disappear into a household that included a fully grown adult man who contributed absolutely nothing. And the worst part? Nobody ever thanked me. Not really. Not in any way that felt like they understood the magnitude of what I was doing. It was just expected. Like paying taxes. Like breathing. Oliver sends the money. That's what Oliver does. I should have said something sooner. I know that. But I want you to understand. There's a difference between knowing something is wrong and actually being ready to blow up your whole family over it. I kept telling myself that next month would be different. That Sutton would finally step up. That Mom and Dad would figure something out. That the water would stop getting warmer. Then came the phone call that changed everything. And honestly, looking back, I'm grateful for it. Because without that call, I'd probably still be writing checks and swallowing my resentment like it was a daily vitamin. But that call, the one that came on a random Thursday evening while I was grilling chicken on the back porch, that was the match that lit the whole thing on fire. So there I was, Thursday evening, flipping chicken thighs on the grill. Cordelia and I had just gotten pre-approved for a mortgage, and we'd been looking at houses in a neighborhood we both loved. For the first time in a long time, I was letting myself get excited about something. My phone rang, and it was Mom. She called me 3 or 4 times a week, usually to chat, sometimes to mention that something else needed fixing or paying for. But this call was different. Mom sounded cheerful, which should have been my first red flag because my mother's cheerfulness almost always preceded a request that was going to cost me money. "Oliver, honey, I'm so glad I caught you," she said. "I wanted to tell you the good news. Sutton's been accepted into a culinary program in Austin. Isn't that wonderful?" I set down my tongs. "A culinary program?" "Yes. It's a 6-month intensive course at some fancy school down there." He's so excited, Oliver. He's finally found his calling. Now, I want to be clear. I don't have anything against culinary school. But this was Sutton's 9th reinvention in 8 years, and I could already see where this conversation was heading like a train approaching from a mile away on a straight track. "That's great, Mom," I said carefully. "How much is the program?" "Well, that's the thing. It's $32,000 for the full 6 months. Plus he'll need living expenses in Austin. We were thinking maybe you could help out. In my family, help out meant pay for it the way a little rain means your basement is flooding. Mom, I'm already sending you guys $2,500 a month. I'm trying to buy a house. Well, we're not asking for all of it. Just help with the tuition." "With Sutton handling living expenses, how exactly? What job does he have right now?" Silence. "He's between things, but once he's in the program, he'll be focused." I took a deep breath and decided to do something I should have done years ago. "Mom, I think it's time Sutton started contributing to the household. He's 28 years old. He's living at home. He's not paying rent or bills. Before we talk about culinary school, can we talk about him helping out with the expenses I've been covering for 8 years?" The silence on the other end of the line was so complete, I actually checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. Then Mom said, in a voice that had gone from cheerful to ice-cold in about 2 seconds flat, "Oliver, I think you should talk to your father about this." And then Dad was on the phone. I don't know if he'd been listening the whole time, or if Mom literally handed him the phone like a relay baton, but suddenly I was hearing his voice, and it had that tone. That firm, end of discussion, I'm the patriarch here tone that he'd used my entire childhood whenever he wanted to shut down a conversation. Oliver, your mother tells me you're being difficult about helping your brother. I'm not being difficult, Dad. I'm asking why Sutton can't contribute to the household expenses. I've been paying for everything for 8 years, and he hasn't put in a single dollar. That's not his responsibility, Dad said. And he said it with such casual certainty, like he was telling me the sky was blue or water was wet, that I actually felt my vision blur for a second. Like my brain was trying to process the words, but they kept bouncing off. What do you mean it's not his responsibility? He lives there. He eats the food. He uses the electricity. How is that not his responsibility? Sutton's in a different place in life than you are, Oliver. You've always been the one who had it together. Your brother's still finding himself. It wouldn't be fair to put that kind of pressure on him. I want you to really absorb what my father just said to me. It wouldn't be fair to put financial pressure on a 28-year-old man who has been living expense-free for his entire adult life. But it's perfectly fair to put it on the son who's been bankrolling the whole operation since he was 26. Dad, I've sent you guys over $200,000 in the last 8 years. And you're telling me Sutton can't pitch in a few hundred a month. Don't throw money in our faces, Oliver. We didn't ask for a ledger. You should be grateful you're in a position to help instead of keeping score. Grateful? He told me to be grateful. I was standing on my back porch, my chicken burning behind me, and my father was telling me I should be grateful for the privilege of being my family's ATM. Dad, I need to talk to Sutton directly about this. Can you put him on? He's out with friends right now. Of course he was. It was a Thursday night, and the man had nowhere to be in the morning because he had no job, no obligations, and no reason to be home because everything in his life was taken care of by someone else. By me. Okay, I said. Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to call Sutton tomorrow and ask him to start paying $500 a month toward household expenses. If he agrees, great. If he doesn't, or if you guys tell me again that it's not his responsibility, then I'm done. I'll stop all payments. Dad laughed. Actually laughed. Come on, Oliver. Don't be dramatic. You're not going to do that. Watch me. I hung up. I stood on that porch for a good 10 minutes, just breathing. The chicken was destroyed. I didn't care. I called Sutton the next morning. He picked up on the 4th ring, sounding like he'd just woken up even though it was almost 11. Hey Ollie, what's up? I laid it out. 8 years of payments. $500 a month from him. That's all I was asking. He was quiet for a second, and then he said, Dude, I don't really have that right now. I'm trying to save up for this culinary program. Save up with what? You don't have a job. I've got some stuff in the works. And honestly, man, this isn't really my thing. Mom and Dad never asked me to pay for anything. They never asked you because they asked me instead. Every single time. Well, that's kind of between you and them, isn't it? I didn't make you send them money. The casual dismissiveness in his voice was staggering. 8 years of my financial sacrifice, and he responded with the enthusiasm of someone being asked to take a survey. I called my parents back that evening. Mom answered. Did you talk to Sutton? She asked. I did. He said no. Well, honey, he's got a lot on his plate right now with the culinary school and everything. Mom, I told Dad last night that if Sutton wouldn't contribute, I'd stop my payments. I'm keeping my word. This is the last month. Mom started crying. That quiet, guilt trip crying she'd perfected over decades. Oliver, you can't do this to us. We depend on you. I know you do. And Sutton should have been helping carry that weight a long time ago. Dad's voice came from the background. You're going to abandon your own parents? After everything we've done for you? I didn't yell. I just said, very quietly, I've given you $200,000 over 8 years, and you told me to be grateful for the opportunity. I'm done being grateful, Dad. And I hung up. I canceled every automatic payment that night. The mortgage, the utilities, the grocery money, the prescriptions, all of it. Cordelia sat next to me while I did it and held my hand, and I'm not ashamed to say that I cried. Not because I felt guilty, but because I finally realized just how much of my life I'd given away to people who treated it like it was nothing. The first week after I stopped the payments was brutal, but not in the way you'd expect. Nobody called. Nobody texted. Just silence. And somehow the silence was worse than the arguments. I kept checking my phone like an idiot. half expecting Mom to call and apologize or Dad to ring and say they'd talk to Sutton. But nothing. Cordelia noticed. She's not the type to hover, but she started doing little things. Bringing me coffee without being asked. Suggesting walks after dinner. That woman has a PhD in knowing when to talk and when to just be there. The second week, the text started. Mom first, of course. Nothing dramatic at first. Just soft, probing messages. Hi honey, hope you're doing well. Then, a day later, the electric bill came today. Just wanted to let you know. She wasn't directly asking, but the implication was about as subtle as a marching band in a library. I didn't respond. Then came the call from my aunt, Dad's sister Rosalind, which told me that my parents had started recruiting allies. Rosalind was sweet, but she had the backbone of a wet noodle when it came to standing up to my dad. And the conversation went about how you'd expect. Oliver, honey, your folks are in a tough spot. I know things haven't been perfect, but maybe you could help them out just a little while longer. Just until they get back on their feet. Aunt Rosalind, they've been getting back on their feet for 8 years. At some point you have to accept that they're just lying on the ground. She didn't really have an answer for that. I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel guilty. There were nights I lay awake wondering if I'd done the right thing. But here's what I kept coming back to. Sutton was right there, living in that house, eating that food, and nobody thought it was reasonable to ask him to help. By week 3, something shifted. I stopped feeling guilty and started feeling free. It was like taking off a backpack you'd worn so long you forgot it was there. And suddenly you can stand up straight and realize you've been carrying 50 pounds of rocks. Cordelia and I threw ourselves into house hunting. Without the $2,500 monthly drain, our finances looked completely different. It was like going from watching a movie in standard definition to suddenly seeing it in 4K. I started putting money into our savings account and watching it actually grow instead of evaporating every month like morning fog. I got a promotion at work around the same time, which felt like the universe saying, hey, good job finally standing up for yourself, here's a raise. I moved into a senior engineering role with a team under me and a salary that made me blink when I saw the offer letter. Not because I didn't deserve it. I'd been working insanely hard for years. But because I'd spent so long pouring money into my parents' house that I'd never let myself think about what my own financial life could look like. We found a house in early March. A 3-bedroom craftsman with a front porch and a backyard big enough for a garden, and the hypothetical dog Cordelia had been lobbying for since our second date. We put in an offer, it got accepted, and I remember standing in the empty living room during the final walkthrough thinking, this is mine. Not my parents. Not my brothers. Mine. Ours. Around this time, I also started seeing a therapist. Cordelia had been gently suggesting it for a while, and I finally caved. His name was Emerson, a tall guy in his 50s with a beard and a voice that sounded like a public radio host, and the man did not pull punches. In our third session, he looked at me and said, Oliver, you weren't just financially supporting your family. You were buying your place in it. And you need to understand that your place in your family should never have had a price tag. That hit me like a truck. Because he was right. Every payment I made wasn't just about keeping the lights on. It was about earning my parents' love. Earning the recognition that Sutton got for free just by existing. I'd been trying to pay my way into feeling valued, and the exchange rate was terrible. I started building new routines. Cordelia and I joined a hiking group that met on Saturday mornings. I reconnected with a college friend named Tully who lived about 40 minutes away, and we started doing monthly dinners. I learned how to cook actual meals instead of the bachelor-level stuff I'd been surviving on. Life started to feel textured again, like someone had turned the color saturation back up after years of everything being kind of gray and muted. Meanwhile, I heard through the grapevine that things at my parents' house were getting tense. Without my money, reality had arrived like an uninvited guest and refused to leave. Dad had to go back to work at a hardware store, which wounded his pride. Mom picked up more bookkeeping clients, and Sutton was finally being asked to pitch in. Except Sutton wasn't handling it well. When Mom asked him to get a job and pay rent, he threw a fit and said he couldn't be creative under financial pressure. The man literally used the word creative to describe his reason for not paying $300 a month. I would have laughed if it wasn't so pathetic. The culinary school fell apart immediately. Turns out it's hard to pay $32,000 when your personal ATM has changed its PIN number. Sutton tried a GoFundMe for his culinary journey that raised about $200. Then, predictably, he He moved on to something involving cryptocurrency and a podcast. Because of course it was. I'm not going to pretend I didn't feel a twinge of satisfaction hearing all this. I'm human, but mostly what I felt was sad. Sad that it took me removing myself from the equation for anyone to even acknowledge that the equation was broken. Sad that my parents would rather scramble and struggle than simply say, yeah, Sutton should have been helping all along. The mental gymnastics required to avoid that conclusion would have won a gold medal. 5 months after I cut the payments, Cordelia and I moved into our new house. Tully helped us move, along with a couple of co-workers. We ordered pizza and sat on the porch drinking beer out of cans, and I remember looking around at these people who showed up because they wanted to, not because I was paying them to be in my life, and feeling something I hadn't felt in years. I felt like I was enough. Just me. Without the money. Without the sacrifice. Just Oliver, sitting on his own porch, being enough. I hadn't spoken to my parents in months. Sutton hadn't texted me once, which told me everything I needed to know about how much our relationship had meant to him when I wasn't useful. The silence hurt, but it was a clean kind of hurt. The kind that comes from a wound that's actually healing instead of one you keep ripping open. But life has a funny way of not letting you stay comfortable for too long. Because right around the 6-month mark, right when I was starting to think that maybe this chapter was closed for good, my mom showed up at my door. And when I say showed up, I mean she was standing on my brand new porch at 8 in the morning on a Saturday, eyes red, hands shaking, looking like she hadn't slept in days. And the first thing she said to me, before hello, before I'm sorry, before anything, was, Oliver, we're about to lose the house. Mom stood on my porch looking like a woman who had aged 5 years and 6 months. Her hair was thinner than I remembered, pulled back in a messy knot, and she was wearing a coat I recognized from when I was in high school. I stood in my doorway in sweatpants and a t-shirt, holding a cup of coffee that suddenly felt very heavy in my hand, and for a long moment neither of us said anything. Cordelia appeared behind me. She took one look at my mother, one look at my face, and said, I'll put on more coffee. Then she gave my shoulder a squeeze and disappeared inside, because that woman reads runes the way other people read books. I stepped onto the porch and sat down on the bench. Mom sat next to me, and then the whole story came pouring out. Without my payments, they'd fallen behind on the mortgage almost immediately. Dad's part-time job covered basics, but not much else. They'd burned through savings in 2 months, missed 3 mortgage payments, and the bank had started foreclosure proceedings. What about Sutton? I asked. I kept my voice calm even though my heart was hammering. Mom looked down at her hands. He got a job at a restaurant, bussing tables, but he quit after 3 weeks. Said the manager was disrespectful, so he's contributed nothing. She didn't answer, which was an answer in itself. Mom, where's Dad right now? At home. He doesn't know I'm here. He'd be furious if he found out. Why? Because I'm the one person who might actually be able to help, and he's too proud to ask. She started crying again. Quiet tears, the kind that come from exhaustion rather than fresh grief. He's ashamed, Oliver. He knows he handled things wrong. He just doesn't know how to say it. And Sutton? Is Sutton ashamed? Sutton. I let that hang in the air for a while. Inside, I could hear Cordelia moving around the kitchen, the quiet sounds of someone making coffee and deliberately giving us space. A dog barked somewhere down the street. It was a perfectly ordinary Saturday morning, and my mother was sitting on my porch telling me her house was being taken away. I want to be honest with you guys. Part of me wanted to write the check right there. Not because my parents deserved it, but because she was my mom and she was crying, and every instinct I developed over 34 years of being Oliver the Fixer was screaming at me to make it better. But a louder voice, one that sounded a lot like Emerson during our therapy sessions, said, "This is how the cycle continues." Mom, I need to think about this. I'm not saying no, and I'm not saying yes. But there are going to be conditions, and they're going to be non-negotiable. Can you accept that? She nodded so fast I thought her head might come off. Anything, Oliver. Whatever you need. Go home. Don't tell Dad you were here yet. I'll call you Monday. She hugged me before she left. It was the kind of hug where you can feel someone trying to communicate everything they can't say with words. All the regret and the fear and the love that was always there, but got buried under years of taking someone for granted. I hugged her back. Then I watched her drive away in a car that I'd paid to repair twice. I spent the rest of that weekend strategizing. And when I say strategizing, I mean I went full engineer on this thing. Spreadsheets, Phone calls, research, the works. Cordelia was my sounding board through all of it, pushing back when my plans were too soft and pulling me back when they were too harsh. First, I called Tully because besides being a great friend, he was a real estate attorney. He walked me through the foreclosure timeline, what options existed, and what the numbers looked like. Then he said something that stuck with me. "Oliver, if you're going to help, help smart. Don't just throw money at it again." He was right. This time, if I helped, it was going to be on my terms. Over the next 3 days, I put together what Cordelia jokingly called the Oliver Accord. It was a written agreement, an actual document, typed up and printed out, outlining exactly what I was willing to do and exactly what I expected in return. Tully reviewed it to make sure it was clear and enforceable, at least in a moral sense, since it wasn't technically a legal contract. But having it on paper mattered. It made it real. Here's what the Oliver Accord said. I would pay off the 3 months of back mortgage to stop the foreclosure. I would continue paying a reduced amount, $1,000 a month, for a maximum of 12 months. Not indefinitely. In exchange, Sutton had to get a full-time job within 30 days and start paying $500 a month toward household expenses. If he missed a payment, my support stopped immediately. My parents had to create a household budget and share it with me monthly. And nobody was to ask me for a single dollar beyond the $1,000. No emergencies, no surprises, no just this one time. Monday morning, I called Mom. She answered on the first ring, which told me she'd been waiting by the phone all weekend. "I'm willing to help," I said, "but there are conditions. I need you, Dad, and Sutton all in the same room this Saturday so I can lay them out. All 3 of you. No exceptions." "I'll make it happen," she said, and her voice cracked with relief. "Oliver, thank you. Thank you so much." "Don't thank me yet, Mom. Save it for Saturday." I spent the rest of the week preparing like I was walking into a boardroom presentation. I printed 3 copies of the Oliver Accord. I prepared talking points. I even practiced what I was going to say in my bathroom mirror while Cordelia shouted suggestions from the bedroom. "Make more eye contact with your dad," she yelled. "And don't let Sutton derail the conversation with some sob story about his creative energy." Saturday came. Cordelia drove with me because she's both my partner and my backbone, but she stayed in the car when we got to my parents' house. "This is your thing," she said, "but I'm right here if you need me." I walked up to the front door of the house I'd been paying for nearly a decade. The porch needed painting, a shutter hung crooked, and Mom's once meticulous garden was overgrown. The whole house looked tired. I knocked. I didn't just walk in. This was deliberate. I wasn't their live-in ATM coming home. I was a visitor with a proposal. Mom opened the door. Behind her, I could see Dad sitting in his recliner, arms crossed, jaw set. And there, sprawled on the couch like he was waiting for a pizza delivery, was Sutton, wearing gym shorts and a hoodie at 2 in the afternoon on a Saturday, looking at his phone. I sat down at the kitchen table and laid out the 3 copies of the Oliver Accord. "Before anyone says anything," I started, "I want to be clear. I love this family. That's why I've been supporting it for 8 years. But the way things were before wasn't fair to me. And if we're going to move forward, some things have to change. These are my terms." Dad glanced at the paper like it was written in a foreign language. Sutton picked his up and actually snorted. And Mom just looked at me with this expression that was equal parts pride and terror, like she was watching her quiet, dependable son become someone she didn't quite recognize. The room was silent except for the ticking of the kitchen clock and the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears. I'd practiced for this moment all week. I'd run the numbers, prepared my arguments, braced for pushback. But nothing could have fully prepared me for what happened next. Because Sutton put down the paper, leaned back in his chair, and said, "You've got to be kidding me, Ollie." And just like that, the real conversation began. Sutton tossed the paper on the table like it was a takeout menu he wasn't interested in. "You seriously typed up a contract? For your own family? That's cold, man." I didn't flinch. 3 months of therapy with Emerson had taught me that Sutton's first move would always be to make me feel unreasonable. Deflect, dismiss, reframe. It was his superpower. It's not a contract, Sutton. It's an agreement. And it exists because 8 years of verbal communication clearly didn't work. Dad leaned forward. "This isn't how family works, Oliver. You don't hand your parents a piece of paper with demands on it." "You're right, Dad. You also don't tell one son that paying for everything is his duty while the other son contributes nothing. But here we are. The room went quiet. Mom was gripping the edge of her coffee mug so hard her knuckles were white. Sutton was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. And Dad was doing that thing he always did when he was losing an argument, which was getting redder in the face and breathing harder through his nose. I walked them through the agreement point by point. The mortgage catch-up, the 12-month limit, Sutton's $500 a month, the budget requirement. I was calm and measured. I sounded like a guy running a meeting, which felt a little ridiculous in my parents' kitchen, but it was necessary. These people had been treating my money like air. Sutton was the first to crack. $500 a month? Where am I supposed to get that? A job, Sutton. That's how it works for everyone else on the planet. I've been looking. The market's tough. You quit your last job after 3 weeks because the manager was disrespectful. The market isn't the problem. He looked at Dad for backup. This was the crucial moment. If Dad backed him up, the whole thing fell apart, and I walked away for good. Dad stared at the paper for a long time. Then he looked at Mom. Something passed between them. Some silent conversation that parents have after 30-plus years of marriage, the kind that happens entirely in the eyes. And then Dad did something I never expected in a million years. He looked at Sutton and said, "He's right." 2 words. He's right. And the entire dynamic of my family shifted on its axis. Sutton blinked. "What? Your brother's right, Sutton. You should have been helping out a long time ago. I should have made you. I didn't, and that's on me." Mom started crying, but this time it felt different. Like relief. She looked at me and said, "We've been unfair to you, Oliver. I don't know how we let it get this bad, but we were unfair, and I'm sorry." When my mom said that, something in my chest unlocked that I didn't even know was clenched shut. Hearing her acknowledge it, even this late, meant more than I can put into words. Sutton, to his credit, and I'm giving him a coupon's worth of credit here, didn't storm out. He looked shell-shocked. The golden child being told his free ride was over. You could practically see his brain rebooting. "So I just have to get a job and pay $500 a month?" he said finally. "Within 30 days. Miss a month, my payments stop." He stared at the table. Then, quietly, he said, "Okay." Everyone signed the agreement. Was it legally binding? No, but it was symbolically binding, and sometimes that matters more. Mom had tears running down her face. Dad signed with grim determination. Sutton signed last, sloppy and reluctant, but it was there. I drove home with Cordelia and told her everything. She said, "I'm proud of you." And then she said, "Let's go get a dog." We got the dog, a scrappy little mutt from the shelter named Hank. One ear stands up, one flops over, and he's absolutely terrible at catching things. He's perfect. Now here's the part of the story that I genuinely didn't expect. Sutton actually followed through. Not gracefully, not cheerfully, but he did it. He got a job at a warehouse within 2 weeks. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't a calling, and he complained about it constantly according to Aunt Rosalind. But he showed up. Every day. And when the first month hit, $500 appeared in our parents' joint account. I kept my end of the deal. I paid off the back mortgage and set up the $1,000 monthly payment with a 12-month timer. Mom started filling out the budget spreadsheet every month, and she was actually pretty good with numbers when she applied herself. Dad got more hours at the hardware store and started picking up handyman jobs on weekends. Mom expanded her bookkeeping clients and started doing remote work for a firm in Chattanooga. The house got a fresh coat of paint. The shutter got fixed. Mom's garden came back. And Sutton, here's the thing I never would have predicted. After about 4 months at the warehouse, he got moved to the logistics side. Turns out the guy who'd bounced between 12 different passions actually had a brain for operations and scheduling. His manager started giving him more responsibility. Last I heard, he was being considered for a supervisory role. He wasn't going to be a celebrity chef or a crypto mogul, but he was becoming something he'd never been before, a functioning adult. We had Thanksgiving at our new house. Everyone came. Cordelia made a turkey that was honestly a little dry, but nobody cared because it was the first time we'd all been in the same room since the kitchen table summit. Sutton brought a pie from the bakery section at the grocery store and seemed quietly proud of the gesture, which tells you everything about how low the bar had been set. But he bought it with money he'd earned, and that meant something. After dinner, Dad found me on the porch. I was sitting with Hank, who was trying to eat a leaf. Dad sat down and was quiet for a while, which is his way of approaching hard conversations. "I owe you an apology," he said. "Not just for the money, for not seeing what I was doing. You were always the one I could count on, and I let your brother off the hook because it was easier than having this fight years ago. I nodded. Yeah, Dad. You did. That word. Responsibility. I used it wrong that night on the phone. I told you it wasn't Sutton's responsibility, and I put it all on you, and that was the worst thing I could have said. It was, I agreed. But you're saying it now, and that counts. He put his hand on my shoulder. It was an awkward, stiff gesture because my father is not a physically affectionate man, but I felt the weight of it. We sat there for a minute watching Hank lose his battle with the leaf, and then Dad went back inside. The 12-month clock ran out 4 months ago. I made my last payment, exactly as promised. And you know what? They're fine. It's tight, but they're managing. The mortgage is current. The lights are on. Sutton's still paying his $500. Cordelia and I are better than ever. We're talking about starting a family, something I never would have felt ready for when I was hemorrhaging money every month. My therapist Emerson recently told me I'd made more progress in a year than most of his clients make in 5, which I think was a compliment, but might have been a commentary on his other clients. I'm not angry at my parents anymore. I'm not angry at Sutton. I was, for a while, but anger is heavy and I spent enough years carrying things that weren't mine. What I feel now is quieter and more solid. I feel like I finally know my own worth, and it has nothing to do with what I can pay for. If you've read this far, thanks for sticking with me. If you take anything from this, let it be this: you are not an ATM. Your value is not measured in what you provide. And if the people in your life only show up when your wallet is open, it's okay to close it. It doesn't make you selfish. It makes you someone who finally decided they deserve to be more than just useful. And if anyone needs me, I'll be on my porch, drinking coffee, watching my weird little dog try to catch things. He still hasn't figured it out. But honestly, neither had I for a long time. We're both learning.